Okay, good morning. We are starting today the Gemara on the top of the page, Zion Amud Beis. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Shimon Shimon Chai. Rabbi Yochanan says the name of Shimon Chai, Min Yom Shabar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Aseh Olam Lo Haya Adam Shekar LaKadosh Baruch Hu Adon. From the day that the Rebbeinu Shalom created the world, no one had called HaKadosh Baruch Hu an Adon. Nobody called HaKadosh Baruch Hu the Master. Ad Sheba Avraham Mekar Adon. Until Avraham Avinu came along, and he called HaKadosh Baruch Hu an Adon. Shenemar Vayomer Adonai Elohim B'Moed Aki Roshena. When Avraham Avinu said the word Adnos about the Rebbeinu Shalom in the question of B'Moeda, how does he know he's going to inherit it? HaKadosh Baruch Hu follows up with him. The first person to call HaKadosh Baruch Hu the Adon was Avraham Avinu. Rav Daniel Avraham. Even Daniel was not answered except for the merit of Avraham. Shenemar, if you look in Daniel, the pasuk tells us, "V'ato." When we put this into the Tachon, Shenemar, "V'ato shema lekeinu al tfilas avdecha." Hashem, you should listen to the tefillah of your servant. Entreaties. And we use Lashon Adnos. And Hashem should again shine his countenance on the mikdash that has been destroyed. Leman Hashem. What does it mean, Leman Hashem? For your benefit, O Lord, right? For your benefit, the Rebbeinu Shalom. It's an appropriate way of talking. You're talking in the third person. You don't say you. So, but the Gemara says no. Nevertheless, Leman Chom, but it should have said for your benefit. Ella. So why does it say Leman Adonai? Why doesn't it say Leman Cha? Leman Avram Shekar Afa Adon. This is really for the benefit of Avram, who called you an Adon. Leman Hashem, with the lashon of Adnos, we're not saying Leman Cha, but rather Leman Avram, for the benefit of Avram Avinu, who called you an Adon. Obviously, that's not the simple pshat of the words. We're talking. Daniel's talking respectfully about the Rebbeinu Shalom, but nevertheless, we also can add an additional point that it's for the benefit of Avram Avinu, who was the first to call you an Adon. So this idea that no one had called HaKadosh Baruch Hu an Adon before Avram Avinu, the Taisus has a problem with it. The top Taisus says, "V'im Tem V'aksiv Baruch Hashem Elokei Shem." So you see that people already called Hashem. It says it's pashut. No, when we're talking about specifically the lashon of Adnos, a lashon HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the master. So yes, they certainly said Baruch Hashem Elokei Shem, right? Which is pasuk right before over there. In Parshas Noach, V'Yichanan Eved Lomai, but nevertheless, that's not Ba'alef Daled. We're looking for a lashon of Adnos. The first person that called HaKadosh Baruch Hu the lashon of Adnos is Avram Avinu, and nobody came before him in that. We will, if we have time, come back to this text later on. It says the Gemara as follows: Again, we're continuing with Rabbi Yochanan, the name of Shimon Chai. How do you know that you shouldn't try to appease somebody when he's upset? Because Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, "Let me first, as it were, calm down. I will go by, and then I will give you a hanach, and then I will make it better for you." The question that you should be asking, you see this Gemara, is how do you know that you shouldn't be maratz a person in Shas Kaisai? You should be reminding yourself, like, oh, didn't we just have that? Literally turn the page back to Zion Amud Aleph. The first wide lines, not all the way wide, but the first wider lines. Second line from there. What does it say? Right? And again, same pasuk. So it's very interesting. As one of the Yavitz notes over here in Zion Amud Aleph, is in the name Rabbi Yosi. Over here on the next page on Zion Amud Beis, it's telling you it's the same exact Gemara, same pasuk as the source, and this time it's coming out not from Rabbi Yosi. This time it's coming out from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Okay, we have to leave that over there. And just an interessant. Continues the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan Shimon Bar Yom Shavar Kadosh Baruch Hu say Lamay Lahaya Adam Shahide LaKadosh Baruch Hu Ad Shabbos Levaydase. From the time of Kadosh Baruch Hu created the world, no one was made to the Rebbeinu Shalom until Leah came along and she was made to him. Made in this case to say thank you, to acknowledge, and no one had done that before Leah. Leah is the first one to be made to the Rebbeinu Shalom. What do we have? We have a song. I mean, it happens to be a pasuk. Yeah, Shenemar Apam Oides Hashem. By this time, she says she's going to thank the bunch. Interesting. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, "Apam oidus Hashem lefi sharasa barach hakodesh." She saw with her heavenly inspiration. She saw with her divine inspiration. Yaakov ma'am shtemos shvatim. Yaakov is going to have 12 shvatim. Veloy arba noshim. He's going to have 4 wives. Kevin she older ben Revi. Once she had her 4th son, Haydis al Chalka, she was able to acknowledge and appreciate her specific chelek. She'oli yosem nacheshben. Hamagela. She got more than what was already coming to her. Notice Rashi over here. Rashi says Veloy arba noshim. Right? It sounds like from Rashi that the Ruach HaKodesh was that that Yaakov was going to be Maimin 12 Shvatim, and he's going to have 4 wives. It sounds like that's a part of the Ruach HaKodesh, but clearly, at that stage, right, Yaakov was not married to these 4 wives, right? By the time that she has Yehuda, she's not married to anybody. And if you look at Rashi, in Chumash, Rashi is more clear. Rashi says, if you look at Rashi and Apam Oidus Hashem in Parashat Vayetze, Rashi tells you that the nevuah, the Ruach HaKodesh that she had was the Daled Noshim Yisa, that he's going to marry 4. Over here, Rashi is not as clear, but you have to say that it means the Ruach HaKodesh was not just the Yaakov is going to have 12 Shvatim, but also that he's going to marry to 4 wives, because at this stage he was certainly not married to 4 wives. But if you look at Rashi in a different way, you could say, well, V'lei Arba Noshim is mashma that he's married to 4 wives, that it can't be, because if you're looking at the Chumash, he had not married anybody else except for Rachel at that stage. Okay, so Apam Oidus Hashem, the first person to say, "Oh my gosh, thank you to Rebbeinu Shalom, I'm going to name my child Yehuda," was Leah. Is that something that stands up as a matter of pshat? Is that something that stands up as a matter of pshat? What do you think? Look in next week's Parsha. Parsha told us you're going to see that one of the wives of Esau was Yehuda's Bas Be'eri Achiti. So how do you say that Yehuda is the first time somebody's acknowledging the Rebbeinu Shalom Apam Oidus Hashem? There was already the name Yehuda before, in the case of Yehuda's Bas Be'eri. So I think the simple answer, Sparno, I think maybe says it as well. The simple answer is we're not saying that's the first time somebody thanked a god. Maybe Yehudas was thanking a different god. This is the first time it was Apam Oides Hashem. Right? Yehudas Bas Be'eri Achiti, Bas Bas Mas Bas Elon Achiti, Vatienem Moris Ruach Yitzchak Rivka. Why? Because they were all idol worshippers. But this is the first time that somebody's thanking the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's Yud Hey being used for what? I'm saying that the Yud Hey is just a god. It's just a god name. It's not necessarily the Jewish god per se. We made this example before that a lot of I think we mentioned, we talked more on Dal about Mifi Baishas, right? His name was probably Mifi Baal, right? But all the names they started later on, they stopped wanting to give names to idolatry. Instead of calling Yerubal, Yerubaishas, right? They changed it. Ish Baishas is instead of Ish Baal. They don't want to name their people anymore Baal, but originally the name was after idols. Later on it becomes Busha. So maybe they used the word Yud K in a way to refer to their non-gods. Okay. So anyway, Leah is the first person to thank the Rebbeinu Shalom, and she is acknowledged as such over here. I should also mention that this Sforno, I think, does say over there that people used names that they had from before. It wasn't always that people made up new names. So it could be that name was around. Again, it wasn't necessarily used to the Rebbeinu Shalom. She's rededicating that name. Meaning, doesn't necessarily mean she came up with it, but it could be. It's in the same family, right? If Yaakov Avinu's sister-in-law has the name Yehudis, it would not necessarily be a name that would be foreign to them. Okay. Again, for all practical intents and purposes, Leah at that station never met Esav. Presumably, it was a bit of a persona non grata. Yaakov had to run away from him, so it's harder to make that argument, but be it as it may. Okay. Continues the Gemara, Reuven. So once we already darshaning all these names, we're darshaning some more. Look at Rashi. It's interesting, Rashi. Rashi says over here the following. So what do we mean, Reuven? We'll go back to the Morpheus, then we'll come back to Rashi. Amar Blazer, Amar Leah, Ru'u ma ben beni ben chami. See the difference between my son and the son of my father-in-law, i.e., the son of my father-in-law Yitzchak. What's his son like? Esav. What's the difference? Even though my brother-in-law, even though Esav sold his bechira midaite, right? that we can quibble on. What does it mean when we say midaita? That means he did it of his own volition, right? We know the pasuk tells us he We're gonna have in next week's parsha. How much of his own volition was it that he was selling the bechera? Was he in fact on his way to die? Was he on his deathbed, or was he in fact, using a figure of speech? He wasn't actually literally about to die. He was just saying he's hungry, right? Because he came home from the field that day and he was not feeling well. But he wasn't literally going to die. If he was literally going to die, he couldn't say that it was midaite zvine, unless you're going on the basis of the Gemara Babas that tells us that tuli of zvine, 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 right? You can help somebody by his fingernails, right? Put a gun to his head, and if he sells it to you, it's still a good sale. Okay, maybe we mean in that sense. You see that he sold his bechera to Yaakov. Chazdu maksiv bay, and nevertheless, what does it say afterwards? Later on in Parshas Toldos, Vayistem Esav is Yaakov. Very Esav hates Yaakov on the bechera that he sold. Chsiv vayom achi karshma Yaakov v'akveni zeh pamayim. It's bechera asi lakach v'hine atol lakach berchasi. Right, he stole my bechera, and now he's stealing my brachas. So you see that Esav, despite volitionally selling his firstborn portion, nevertheless is still furious about it. V'ilu b'ni, and my son. And my son, even though Al Karcha, he was stolen, or I shouldn't say stolen, he was taken away his Bechera from him. Right, once he had moved the beds of his father. In other words, the pasuk that says in Parshas Vayishlach that after Rachel died, that whatever the pasuk means, Vayishkav Yosef is Bila Pelagish Aviv. Again, what that means later on, the pasuk says in Parashas Vayechi. Right, you don't need the Gemara Shabbos on Nun Hey to tell us this. We know already. The pasuk says later on, Uven b'chari ata kechi v'reishis oni yeser seis v'yeser oz. Right, Pachas kamayim al toisa ki olisa mishke ve'avicha oz chilalta yitzui Allah. Right, Yitzui Allah. That's the way he translates Vayishkav. So again, the Ibn Ezra wants to make it a pasha pshat that where mechasa the sins of those, and it's a praiseworthy thing to do. But meaning because he doesn't want to go to Gemara Shabbos, he wants to go to pasha pshat. But I always have thought that look at the way Yaakov refers to what Reuven did. He doesn't say that he had relations with Bilal. What he says is Chilalta, right? Yitzui Allah, you went up on my bed. Meaning maybe what Chazal said is a matter of pshat, that he actually moved the beds. And that's the way you also see in Divrei Yomim, that the pasuk says he was Mechal the Yitzui Aviv. Okay. So what happened? So what happened to the bechera that he had? When he was mechal the bread of his father, his bechera was given to Yosef. Nevertheless, he was not mekane, and nevertheless he didn't wasn't jealous of him. Right, the pasuk says that Reuven heard what was going on with Yosef, that he was put into the bar. He says, we're not going to kill him. So in the end, the brothers listen to him. Right? They don't kill him. They sell him, but they don't actually kill him, which is what they intended to do. Right? The pasuk tells them by the beginning of Vayeshev there when Yosef saw right, let's kill him. Right? And that Reuben was able to stop them from doing. And even though his bechor was taken away by Yosef, which presumably at this stage he already understood that there was a breakdown, a dissension of his relationship with Yaakov, given what had happened in the previous parsha of Vayishlach, he already understood that. And nevertheless, in the next parsha in Vayeshev, you see that Reuven is willing to step up front and center to go save him. And this becomes a whole part of Reuven, that he is a paras kamayim. He is willing to. He doesn't hold things in a fundamentalist way. He's willing to forgive and forget, but he also moves without thinking. And so you see that in this case, willing to go against the brothers, also when the brothers are confronted by Yosef. So you see again about Reuven, the fact that Reuven says to the brothers while they're standing in front of Yosef, while they're having problems, he says to them, he says that Reuven says to the brothers that I told you that we shouldn't sell him, and you didn't listen. So and again later on when he says to Yaakov about the fact that Yaakov is not willing to send up Binyamin, so he says, my son should die. Again, this is a classic from Reuven. Okay, but what's very fascinating is that if you notice, this has nothing to do with the Pashup Shan and Pasuk. What did the Pashup Shan and Pasuk say? Why did Leah name Ruvain? We don't see it here. We have to go back to Pashup Vayetze. What did the Pasuk say? Right? She's hoping that her husband's going to love her, Yetzer, right? And the next one's going to say, that's for Shimon. So Hashem is going to see me in my pain. So Hashem, that's the real Pashup Pshat. So how could we be giving another Pshat? The Maharatz wants to note. It says because you see that the names had many times double meanings. Look at Yosef. Asav Hashem Yosef li ben Acher. So over here also has a double name. One is a Pashup Pshat. One is the rabbis adding a name, but it's not fundamentally changing. The rabbis agree that Pashup Pshat is Ru Hashem ba'ani, but we're adding a different thing. Reuven could become an Atrikin for Uma ben Beni leben Chami. Fine. Says Rashi. For the future, this is what the name is going to be called. Like we're going to see now in this new Gemara that the name has an impact. Says the Gemara, Rus. Why is she called Rus? My Rus. So the Gemara says, David, because she had a schus, who was the great grandmother of David HaMelech. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was saturated, as it were, with shiras and tishbachos from David HaMelech, and that is what Rus is referring to. Rus is Riveu and shiras and tishbachos. That's the Shema Garim. Rashi points out Rus HaMavia, in case you weren't sure which Rus we're talking about. Because we're already talking about different names and what the names mean, so we're telling you. So Rus becomes a Shema Garim, Al Fema Asid, that her great grandson is going to be the one doing shiras and tishbachos for the Rebbeinu Shalom. Minol and the Shema Garim. What is the source that the name has an impact on Rabbi Lezer? So how do you know that names really have such an impact? We see Rus has an impact. She has this great grandson David, who's going to be Rivei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, shiras and tishbachos. But how do you know that actually the names do that? The Pasuk says, "L'chu chazum mefalis Hashem." Go see the wonders of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Asher sam shamais b'aretz, that He makes the desolation in the land. Tikri shamais, don't read it as a desolation. El shemais, but rather names. So meaning, they'll see the wonders of the Rebbeinu Shalom, that He puts names in the ground. Meaning, in other words, in the name is going to be the wonders of the Rebbeinu Shalom, that it's going to change what somebody's destiny is going to be like. So now we have to stop here and talk a little bit about what's going on. Number one, Hashem is that this is from Tehillim, right? The pasuk in Tehillim. It happens to be. I'm always bothered by a medrash in Tanchum by Yeshiv Dal. The medrash says on a different topic. I've talked about this medrash before. I'm not discussing it now, but I always wonder. The medrash says Chazu, and the pasuk says Ru'u. It doesn't say Chazu. Chazu and Ru mean the same exact thing. But I wonder if the Medrash misquoted, the Tanchuma there misquoted it, because you have another pasuk in that says Chazu right here. We have it until Memvav. Okay, maybe. Now, we're learning out from this pasuk in Tehillim, that the Shemais is Garim, that the name that you give to a person has an impact. We know, as I mentioned already before, names are fundamental. The first thing that Adam's job is in the world. Meaning Hashem gives him a job. That's the job that he has. But the first thing we see Adam actually doing as a job is Hashem brings him all the animals. To see what he's going to call them. That's the first thing that we know Adam does in the world, is he's giving names. Names are very fundamentally important. It's not a Hasidic thing to make names important. It was the first job of man. Fine. The names are very, very fascinating and very important. Did you notice who we're learning out the name from here? We're learning out from Rus. Who gave Rus his name? It's a Goshen name, Rus HaMayaviyah. We're learning out from a Goshen name that she revealed HaKadosh Baruch Hu, her grandson is going to be Meraveu HaKadosh Baruch Hu, shiras tishbachos. He's saying that a Goshen name is having impact also, not just a Jewish name. Yeah, right. We have no problem. Let's say, for example, Rosh Hashanah, right? So you make all sorts of Yehiratzins. Maybe some of you do this, right? And as the Aruch HaShulchan points out, anything that sounds good in any language, it's all valid, it's all good. So carrots and merit. Okay, merit. It sounds like something in Hebrew also. Great, let's use that. Anything, in any language. I'll say more. The idea that Shemais Garam, the Gemara tells us in Yuma Ein Gimel, the Gemara tells us there about you remember the Maisa with Kedar? The Gemara says over there that they were going on a road, and they stopped off in an inn. Rameir, Rabbi Yosef, Yehuda, students all over Kiva, the second batch, right? So they stopped off in an inn, and the innkeeper's name was Kedar. So the Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, they gave him the wallet. So Rameir didn't. Why? Because Rameir was Daik Bishma. Rameir was Daik in names. And he remembered the pasuk says Kedar Tapucha same abundant, right? It's a bad generation. It's upside down. So he didn't want to give him. It turns out that the guy wanted to steal the wallet, so he didn't give it back to the rabbis. Or Rameir kept his wallet. They asked him, right, how he knew, because he said he was Daik Bishma, but he didn't want to tell them because he wasn't 100% sure. The guy was a Rush. It turned out he was. If you remember, how did they got the wallets back? They got the wallet back because they gave him a simon. Your wife said she give the wallet back because you had beans for or whatever for breakfast or something, right? But the reality was that he didn't wash after the meal, and that's why he had not um, become cleaned up. In any event, the fundamental point about being daik b'shmam is something that would be based upon the idea that a shma is gar. Right? If his name is Kidar Tafucha, if his name is Kidar, right, then clearly his name is telling you a word about himself, that a name has a substantial impact, a substantial weight. Should point out, just once we're already mentioning it about Goyish names, that the Gemara tells us in Gittin Yud Aleph that the roiv of the Shemais of the Jewish people were names of Goyim. They used non-Jewish names. Moshe writes in a tshuva, Moshe writes that the whole idea of not giving non-Jewish names was only, right, which we have a big praise in the Medrash. The Medrash says that it's a big, huge praise. The Jews will learn Mishana Shemam, right? We call it the famous trope. It's not actually a Medrash. The Medrash has various versions, but it doesn't actually say, there's no actual Medrash that says Shloshinu Shemam Abusham and Lashainam. That's a composite of a variety of Midrashim. Nevertheless, on Lashinu Shemam, that we find in many Midrashim, Rav Moshe says it doesn't apply anymore Bisman Hazeh. Why? Because Bisman Hazeh, the idea of the Shemam is no longer needed. You could give non-Jewish names because we have a Torah to protect us between us and the nations. Whereas in Mitzrayim, because they didn't have a Torah, they needed to have names being separate fundamentally to make the people different than the non-Jewish surroundings. All right, continues the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan, when a person has problems in a home, that problems in a home it can be even worse than the Mukham of Goy Gumagog. Right at the very beginning of Tehillim there, David is saying a mismar, a psalm of David. What's the psalm? When he was running away from Avshalom, his son. Right, my enemies are surrounding me. Everybody's coming and ganging up on me. And nevertheless, if you look in the capital before, which is talking about the Melcham of Gog and Magog, right? Why are they all so excited? All the nations. But it doesn't say what about enemies not ganging up on me. So I would say the Pashup shot is this. The Pashup shot is that's talking about in the future times. The nations are so happy. That's in the future. He's not worried about the enemies because they're not happening right now. But when Mizbah is not him in his own life. Okay, that's what you might say is the Pashup shot. But the Gemara understands it. No, the Gemara understands it that there is a worse pain when somebody has a problem in a home is even a worse pain than the Chum of Gog and Magog. And anybody who has gone through major, home issues understands the psychic pain, right? The Gog and Magog, it's not a psychic pain. It's not coming after you innately. It's coming after Jewish people. It's coming after the prized ones of the Rebbeinu Shalom. It's not coming after you innately. Whereas a major dissension, major strife in a home, it's psychologically traumatic because it goes after a person innately. The Gemara says, continuing on this idea that dissension in a home is so terrible. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Mizmar David bevarchem ne'avshalom b'nai. So how did David and Melech open up the Mizmar by saying a psalm of David? He's praising the Rebbeinu Shalom because of what's happening with Avshalom. Mizmar David bevarchem ne'avshalom b'nai. So the Gemara takes out the Gemara is taking out this idea that dissension in the home is so terrible. So what does it mean? That it's a mizmar David. Mizmar David, kino David. It should be a kina. It should be a lament for David. He should be so sad that his son is coming after him. It's a terrible thing. What do you mean that it's something to be praising the Rebbeinu Shalom about? Amar Rav Shimon of Shalom, Mashal Ma'adav Dema, La'adam Shiatza Elav Shtarchayv, Kaidem Shapari, Ayatze V'Acha Shapar Samech. You know what it's like? It's comparable to something where a person has a debt against him. So Kaidem Shapara, till he pays it off, he's very sad. He's scared. He's got to pay off. He's got a bill on him, and he's got to pay down. Once he's able to pay it off, then he's samach, then he's happy. Af Kain, so to hear by David Hamelach, Kevin Shalom Lakadosh Baruch Hu, Hineni make him Melecha Rami Beisacha. Once Hashem had promised, right, a punishment for him that I'm going to be standing up by you, a bad thing in your home. What do you mean a bad thing in your home? Because of what he had done with Bathsheba, he's going to get punished for the bad thing in his home. So he was very sad. What does it mean somebody's going to be standing up a terrible thing in my home? He thought maybe one of his servants is going to go rebel against him. Once he saw that it was Avshalom, he was happy. Why was he happy? So the Mepharshim explained, because Avshalom, no matter the fact that he was terrible, that he was chasing David, was he going to kill him? If he ever caught David, would he have killed him? So they want to suggest he wouldn't have killed him. They would have locked him up. But they wouldn't have mamish, they wouldn't have treated him the way an Eved would treat David HaMelech if the Eved was the one who was rebelling against the throne. If you had somebody who was revolting, who was not related to David, maybe they would have treated him far worse. Maybe. If so David has now at least some confidence that he will survive. So now he says a mizmar instead of a kino LeDavid. Did you notice in this Gemara, we're going to have it a few times on this page, so I won't point it out yet. I'll point it out soon. But I just want to note one thing. Notice the Gemara said, we're talking about here Avshalom. And who's the mimer of this piece? Amar Rav Shimon ben Avshalom. Yeah? Amar Rav Shimon ben Avshalom. Right? So you notice how the Gemara says Avishalom? The Gemara says Avishalom. Why is it saying Avishalom? And why doesn't it say Avshalom? Because his name can't be Avshalom. Why can't it be Avshalom? Because we know the Gemara tells you Yom Ches, B'Shem Rishon Yirkov, right? Zecher Tzadik Levracha. You remember Tzadik forever, but the name of the evil people should be, going into the air. It should be forgotten. So B'Shem Rishon Yirkov. So how could you give a name like Avshalom? In Israel, the popular name Nimrod. How could you give a name like Nimrod? How could you give a name like Avshalom? So Rabbeinu Tam says you can't read it Avshalom. It's Avishalom, and that's the girsa that we have over here as well. We'll come back to that in a few moments. All right. Continues the Gemara. Now we're up to the another Amar Rabbi Yechon Shimon Shimon Nechai. Amar Rabbi Yechon Shimon Shimon Nechai. Mutalis guys Rishayim Lo Elam Hazeh. We're able to start up with Rishayim in this world. Because the pasuk says, Rasha, those that abandon the Torah, right? The Rasha praises them. Hashem Torah is Garubam. But those that watch over the Torah, those that are Hashem Torah mitzvahs, they're going to start up with them. Tanya Nami Hachi, we have another right to this from a Brisa. Rabbi Stoy ben Rabbi Masan, Omer. Rabbi Stoy says, the name of Ramatun, Mutulis guys for Sham Bel Mazeh, you're allowed to start up with a Sham in this world. Shenema is V'Torah Yalu Rasha, the same pasuk. Those that abandon the Torah, the Rasha praises them. And those that are going to be honoring the Torah, the Shem Torah, are going to be Skorbam, they're going to start up with them. Bim Lachsech Adam Loimar, if somebody is lachshech, is whispering to you, and he's telling you, what says in pasuk al tischa b'mereim al takani ba'isa avla, right? That you shouldn't, as it were, be messing around with the evil people. Shouldn't be jealous of those that are doing terrible things. Which Rashi explains that means that you shouldn't be starting up with these evil people. In other words, the opposite of what we just said. So Amalai, you should tell him, Misha by Nakfa, why is this guy whispering to him, but maybe you shouldn't start up with these people? That only somebody who's sort of self-conscious about their own actions is going to talk like this. Ella what does it mean that you shouldn't be going with the evil people? Lias Kimran, to become like them. Don't be jealous of those that are doing sins. Lias to be like the ones who are sinning. But fundamentally, you 100% can be starting up with them. You have a pasuk. Don't be jealous of those that are sinning. Rather, those that are fearing God all the time. Now we're going to have another Gemara. But before we get to the next Gemara, I just want to point out another thing. We had said yesterday on Zayin Amud Aleph, right? You remember what we said yesterday on Zayin Amud Aleph? We talked about a Gemara about Rav Shimon Levi, that there were people bothering him in the middle of the very wide lines. There was Hanin Tzeduki, the Havu B'Shavus and Rabbi Shimon Levi, who's become entirely to a Bikra, and he wanted to kill him. And he tried to make a whole thing with the chicken, the rooster, the crown turning white. It was a whole ma'isa. And then he realized that maybe he shouldn't do that, even though we say that Tzukim are maridim. Nevertheless, he didn't think that was appropriate. And then we saw the Gemara also Yom Amaraf. We didn't get there yet, but we also quoted the Gemara that there was Biryani of Nehu B'Shvisa Drive Me'er Komentarli Tuva, and he wanted to kill them. And his wife said, "Doesn't say Tamu Chaytim in Arts, says Tamu Chatom in Arts. Get rid of the sins. You should daven. They should do tshuva." So here we're not talking about it. Obviously, where there's an option to do something like that. Here we're saying a situation where the person is a Russia, and clearly there was no feeling that you're able to help these people out, presumably, and that's why we're saying mutalis gars b'rishon b'elam hazeh. You're allowed to mess up. You're allowed to fight with these rishonim in this world. But I want to point out to you an unbelievable thing. Look at the name of this brayso, as Rabbi Distoy Rabbi Moton. The name of the brayso is coming from Rabbi Distoy. The name of Rabbi Moton. What's Rabbi Moton? What does Moton mean? So if you look at the Gemara in Brachot Chaf Amud Aleph, Brachot Chaf Amud Aleph, the Gemara brings a ma'aser down. I think it was Rabbi Ada Bar Ava who went out. There was a woman who was dressed in the shuk. She was wearing. The question was that, like, what's the difference between nowadays and the olden days? There's Rabbi Ada Bar Ava. Rabbi Bar Ava, he saw kusis in the shuk. He thought she was wearing an inappropriate mixture of wool and linen, so he ripped it off her. And it turned out she was a guy. He had no problem with wearing klayim, so they punished him. And he had to pay 400 zuz. So matan can mean in 200 in Aramaic. So matan, she cost him 400. But Rashi also says over there, matan means hamtana, patience. Matan. That what his mistake was they should have found out before he was such a kanoi to rip off her clothing, because he thought maybe she's being over on Kalayim, that he first should have figured out who she was. Panti, how you see Mistake, if I would have had patience, I would have waited. I would have saved myself $400. So I want to point out to you that that's why we're bringing down this brayso, the name Rabbi Moton. Rabbi Distoy, Rabbi Moton is the one who's telling you, Mutar Lisgaris B'Rishoim. You have every right to be able to fight with the Rishon. But remember who's the mimer. The mimer is from Rabbi Moton. Have patience. Calm down. Before you go and fight with the Rishon, first think about it. First wait a little bit. And that's why what pointed out before, you see something like this throughout Shas. Again, you have to always understand. The Gemara sometimes uses names that are exactly precise to help remembering the member. Look at the member before. Mizmor David, right? Bevorchim Ibnei Avshalom Benoy. Who's the one giving you the mimer? Rabbi Avshalom. He's giving you that mimer. We have a similar thing, mamash, we had it before. If you remember, the Gemara tells us on Hey and Aleph. You remember the Gemara told us there. Amar Rav Amar Avskara Amar Rav Huna Kol Shekadosh Baruch Hu Chavetz Bo Midaki B'Yisurin. Whoever Hashem loves, He gives them Yisurin. What's the name of the rabbi giving you the memory? Rav Skara. Right? You should remember the one who's going to be talking about the schar that the people get in this one. They have tsaris is the rabbi. His name was Skara himself. Right? So these are the kinds of things. Again, you keep your ear out, the antenna open. You see that a lot of times these kinds of little plays in the Gemara that the Gemara is giving you. Okay, continues the Gemara. Continues the Gemara. We are up to now a kasha on this. So we just said that it's mutter to be misgar b'rishon. It's mutter to start up with rishon in olam hazeh. It's mutter to fight with them. Again, we've given the various caveats and qualifications, but now the Gemara wants to know. I don't understand. Ask your steer. Russia that's having a great old time in this world. Altis Garba, you shouldn't start out with him. You see that he's having success in all of his things that he's doing. He's going to even beat you in judgment. He's going to be able to look at all of his enemies. He's going to be able to like snort at all of them and like laugh at them. He's going to beat everything. So you see that you're not supposed to mess around with Rishoim when they have the Shom. So the Gemara says, so what did you just say? You just said that you're able to start with Rishon. So what's the answer? Like Kasha, the difference between when it comes to your own issues and issues of heaven. When it comes to your own issues, don't mess with them. When it comes to the Ben Shalom's issues, then you can start up with them. Maybe that's one teretz. Both is talking about Milad Shmaya. So when is it mutter then? When is it also? You have different types of Rishon. If it's Mamash Rishon, it's very obvious and clear that he's having tremendous success, then it would be also. If it's not so obvious, then it will be mutter. So we're talking about a Russia who's mamash having a great old time here on this world. Then how can it be much to be messing around with him? Depends on you. If you're a tzaddik gomer, then you can always mess around with Rishon. If you're not a tzaddik gomer, then you may not. So three different possible answers. The Omer Rav Huna, we have another possible source for the same idea. What does it mean? The pasuk Habakkuk, when you see those that are rebelling, those that are problematic, to be silent. When the Russia is swallowing the Vola Russia tzaddik menu, when the Russia is swallowing the tzaddik from who's greater than him. What does it mean? V'chi Russia b'alei tzaddik. Does the pasuk mean that a Russia swallows up a tzaddik? V'aksiv Hashem le'azvenu b'yadoi. But no, we know that Hashem's not going to abandon the tzaddik in the Russia's hand. Well, you know, the tzaddik kol oven. Hashem's not going to totally let the tzaddik go into iniquity. Tzaddik menu b'leah. What it means is that a Russia is able to swallow up a tzaddik from him, mimenu, but not a tzaddik gomer. Tzaddik gomer ain't b'leah, but he can't mama swallow up a tzaddik. So this would go with the Gemara's answer before that a tzaddik gomer can mess around with Rishon at any time. But a regular tzaddik, meaning just a good guy, no, he shouldn't try to just mess around with Rishon. Could be a difference if the Rush is having mamash a great old time. If the Rush is having mamash, he's in a zen, he's in the moment, he's 100% in the right place, everything is going well for him, then don't mess around with him. Even if you're a tzaddik, you shouldn't go around with him. Again, these are two of the answers that we saw before. It's the same idea that we're just mentioning from Rav Huna instead. Okay, so continues the Gemara. Anybody who has a mokem kavua for his prayer, his enemies are going to fall before him. Notice that we already said this, right? We on page before. What do we say? The Gemara told us, Amar Chelboy, Amar Huna, Kol Kaveh Mokem L'Tfilos, Eliki Avram Bezrei, Uchshemeis Armle Onav Eichasim Tamid Shal Avram Avinu. Right, that somebody who's setting up a mokem kavua for himself, he's the Talmud of Avram Avinu. He is a special person. The Gemara is saying about such a person that Hashem will answer his prayers. And now we're bringing up the same idea. Different rabbis, but the same idea. Whoever's kaveh mokem tefillah, they're going to have success over the enemies. Shenemar samtin mokem lam Yisrael and tativ v'shochan tativ leigers oiv leisifu b'nei avlo la noisei kasher barishayna. Pasuk says there, a long pasuk in Shmuel, that basically and you have to know the context here. The context is very interesting. The context over there is that David, the Shmuel base, after David HaMelech has had big success, all of the enemies are machnia. Nobody's bugging him anymore. Life is peachy. And he said, David HaMelech says to himself, I'm sitting here in a house of cedar. I'm sitting here in a wonderful place. And the Rebbeinu Shalom is sitting in what? The Rebbeinu Shalom is in a tent. The Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't have a house. And so he says he's going to build. And then the Navi tells him, oh, it's a good idea. You should build. Then Hashem comes to the Navi and says, hey, slow down, Navi. I didn't tell you that he should build. He's not going to build. But he can build the foundation. More in the end of Marcus, that Melch goes and builds all the subterranean foundations for the Beis Hamikdash. He doesn't actually build the Beis Hamikdash. That is Shlomo Melch. Why? Because he had too much blood. Fine. The idea then is the Navi comes to David and Hashem says the following. Hashem says, did I ever complain to you that I don't have a place? I never complained to that I don't have a place. All these years, since the time the Jewish people have come into the land of Israel, it's already hundreds of years of the Shoftim. Hundreds of years, the Jewish people have not had a place for the money. Mishkan Shila, and you had all the different places where the Mishkan was. Mishkan Shila alone was 300 years. Hashem never complained, I didn't have a place. Now, he said, in this very pasuk, when David wants to build a place for the Rebbeinu Shalom, we have a pasuk that HaKadosh Baruch was telling David about the fact that if he has a place, that place will be sound, and will no longer be that the Bnei Avla will be starting up with him, Kasher Barishayna. So I find that very fascinating when it talks about the Mokem Kavua. Now for the Rebbeinu Shalom, Kaviyachol, that's going to be a Beis Hamikdash, is where we learn out the idea of a Mokem Kavua for us. Okay, continues the Gemara. So Rav Huna asks us the kasha, ksiv la'anoisei, ksiv l'chaloisei. In Divrei Yom, the same pasuk is written l'chaloisei, not la'anoisei. And actually, if you look on the side, if you look in Divrei Yom, you see it says actually not l'chaloisei, it says l'valoisei, to swallow up, to destroy. So the pasuk is saying again, I'm going to make a place for the Jewish people. I'm going to plant you in the land. But you guys, they're not going to mess around with you, the enemies. The Bnei Avla are not going to start up with you anymore. So either means and it says in Shmuel to start up with you, and in the end, the Divrei Yom says the to destroy you. They're not in the end be able to destroy you. Again, over the years, we know that they've been able to start up with us, but fundamentally, in the ultimate, they will not be able to destroy us. Okay, last Gemara, and then we have to see the thesis, and we have no time. But Rabbi Yochanan, of course, that's greater to be the shimush of Torah, even greater than learning Torah. Elisha ben Shafar, Elisha is introduced as the person who poured water on Eliyahu's hands. It doesn't say that he learned. Eliyahu, like he poured. It doesn't say Elisha he was learning Torah from Eliyahu. It says he was pouring water on him. So the Maritzchi is asked, I don't understand. Shimush shel Torah, what are you saying? It's not Torah? No, it is Torah. Look at the Gemara later on, Sama Gimel and Brachos. The Gemara tells us that they were hiding under the bed. Rav Kahana was hiding under the bed of Rav. The people following him keep it to the bathroom. What does it mean, all these things? The idea being, when Rav says to Rav Kahana, Kahana, get out of here. What are you doing under my bed? While he's engaged in intimate activities. So the Gemara says that Rav Kahana responded, Torah hi v'lumad ani tzarech. It's all Torah. Even Shimush shel Torah is Torah. It's Torah through Anhaga. It's all Torah. This is what the Maritzchi quotes in the name of the Vilna Gaon. Okay, we have 2 minutes. We have to do this thesis because you cannot skip this without doing this massive thesis. What I'll do is I'll tell you this thesis outside. The thesis says, if you look carefully in the Chumash, the pasuk says when Abraham says there's already another pasuk before that already says the word Adnos. The pasuk says so Abraham already said Adnos. So why is it that we don't quote that pasuk earlier? So Taisa Rosh says, okay, don't be such a medactic. Okay, that's Taisa's first answer. Taisa here doesn't answer. Taisa Rosh answers that. But Taisa gives another answer. And that answer is an unbelievable answer that changes the whole world, okay? The answer is as follows. We don't have time to go into it now, but here's the answer of Taisa. Taisa says that there is actually a misunderstanding of when these parashas took place. The parasha Bishan and Absarim took place when Avram was 73 years old. The parasha of beginning of Lech Lecha takes place when Avram was 75 years. Don't ask questions. The parasha of Achad Dvarim Elu, which is the first of Vayom Adnos Hashem Alekim, that's taking place after the War of the 4 and the 5 Kings. That is a different age. These things took place at different times. The beginning of Lech Lecha takes place at 75. That took place after the Bris Bein Absarim, which took place earlier at 70 years old. And the War of the 4 Kings and the 5 Kings took place when Avram was 73 years old. This is the sheet of Taisa, the Rush. Look in Shabbos on Yodom Beis. Shlaim lasted 52 years. This is how it all works itself out. One problem, one fundamental major problem is that we have no separation of the parashas in our Chumash. Taisa had a different parashas system. The Rambam, Pariches, and Hilchos Stam. The Rambam tells us that we do not have a Torah that has the right parashas. It's the Apostle Sefer Torah. Apostle Sefer Torah. And yet there's a different parashas in the Sefer Torah of the Taisa than our Sefer Torah. Chasam Sefer Archaim. Simon Nun Beis, Chasam Sefer says why we don't make brachas on making and writing a Sefer Torah. There's different answers given. One of the answers Chasam Sefer says, because we're not experts. We're not experts in the Torah. Mark Kedushin Lamed Aleph, look in the bottom over there as well. One last point just to mention is that in relation to Vart on the Parsha, here we have in this week's Parsha that Vart. Look at the last Aliyah, V'livnei Pilagshim Asher LaAvram. Rashi says written Chasar. Why? Because the Pilagesh was who? Keturah. Keturah is the Pilagesh. Look at our Sefer Torah. It's Pilagshim. It's Mole. It's not a Chasar. It's exactly that. Have a good day.